Welcome. A few days ago, NOAA issued its February of 2020 Global Climate Report, and this video is a summary of that report. The bottom line here is that February of 2020 was the second warmest February on record. I've listed here the ranking of each category as far as February is concerned, and it was ranked second in every single category: global, land, ocean, northern and southern hemisphere. The in parentheses is the amount of warming with respect to the 20th century average. And remember, the 20th century average contained quite a bit of global warming. And on the right, we have the amount of increase over the previous year. And you can see every single category except for the southern hemisphere was warmer than the equivalent time last year. This means we've had 422 consecutive months, that's over 35 years, with temperatures above their 20th century average. Well, let's take a look at how these temperatures were distributed around the globe. This color scheme represents departure from average. So dark blue represents a large cooling trend. Dark red indicates a large warming trend. And as you can see, there are several areas that are much cooler than average, particularly Alaska and northern Canada, whereas Siberia, Western Europe, Western Africa, China, and a few other places around the globe were much above average. One of the things to look at here is the area off the southwest coast of South America, and you can see we have a mixture of both warmer and cooler temperatures. This is the area that indicates whether we've got an El Nino or a La Nina, and this means we're at the moment in neutral conditions, as we shall see later. You will note that we were 1.14 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average for this February. That's an increase of a stunning 0.26 degrees centigrade over February of last year. The previous map does not show you whether any of those departures were record temperatures. This map does. This is called the percentiles map. On this scale, dark blue represents a record cold reading over the area of the pixel shown, and dark red indicates record warm over the area. You'll see there are no record cool areas in the whole of this last month. There are a few pixels that are much cooler than average, particularly that spot off of the southeast coast of Greenland. However, there are a large number of much warmer than average pixels, hundreds of them, and there are 93 pixels here that show new record high temperatures set for this period. This indicates that we have a warming planet still. Another way to look at this is to compare the number of record high temperatures set at individual daily stations with the number of record lows. In February, we had 5,103 new record highs compared with only 1,008 new record lows. That's a ratio of about 5 to 1. Year to date, the story is very similar, with 19,079 record highs and just 3,286 record lows, a ratio of 6 to 1. As you can see here, I've updated my matrix to reflect that February was the second warmest February on record. It equally shows that 2020 is already outpacing 2019, which was the second warmest year on record, and is equivalent to 2016 so far. However, I don't think that situation is going to remain for the rest of the year. When we take a look later at the status of El Nino and La Nina, it looks as though we're sliding towards a La Nina towards the end of the year. It's always interesting to look at the satellite data, which measures the temperature at altitudes in the atmosphere of the Earth. We've been dealing up to this point with surface temperatures. So we use the data from two groups, the University of Alabama Huntsville and Remote Sensing Systems. They both look at the same data, but they have slightly different analysis techniques and they get slightly different results. So we'll start with the lower troposphere, which has an average altitude of about 4 kilometers. And they both find that February was the second warmest on record, and that the average warming trend for that level of the atmosphere is 0.18 degrees centigrade per decade, which is remarkably similar to the value that you get from the surface temperatures. A bit higher in the atmosphere, the mid-troposphere is about 7 kilometers. Both UAH and RSS find that it was the warmest February on record, with an average warming trend of 0.13 degrees centigrade per decade, which is lower than the lower troposphere, but that was what you'd expect at a higher altitude in the atmosphere. The highest altitude of all is the stratosphere, that's about 17 kilometers, and both UAH and RSS found it was the 10th warmest on record. But interestingly, UAH found a slight warming trend, whereas RSS found a slight cooling trend, but they both together find that the overall trend is about 0.24 degrees centigrade per decade cooling. This is exactly what you'd expect if there were more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, preventing the escape of infrared radiation from the surface, which is what partly warms the stratosphere. Next, let's take a look at the sea ice extent, particularly in the northern hemisphere, i.e. the Arctic. February of 2020 was the 13th lowest on record. It was the 19th consecutive year with below average sea ice in the Arctic. However, it's a significant increase over the all-time low of 2 years ago. And that's perhaps not surprising because we had such a strong polar vortex this year that bottled all the cold air up into the Arctic area, which would have increased the sea ice extent quite significantly. Overall trend over the last few decades has been a loss of 0.29% per decade. Well, there's a very similar picture in the southern hemisphere. Also, it was the 13th lowest sea ice extent in the southern hemisphere and represents a significant increase over the all-time low from just 3 years ago. The overall trend in the southern hemisphere is a slight increase in sea ice of 0.8% per decade. Well, what's happening to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? This is the plot from NOAA each month measured at Mauna Loa. You can see in February of 2020 we had 414.1 parts per million. That's an increase of 2.3 parts per million over February of last year. Now the all-important status of El Nino and La Nina. At the moment we are in ENSO neutral conditions, i.e. we have neither an El Nino nor an La Nina. However, it looks as though the trend in the plots towards the end of this year is towards a La Nina. However, ENSO neutral conditions will continue for at least the next 5 or 6 months. The number of tornadoes in the US is well above average for this time of year. At the moment, through the middle of March, we stand at 133, which is well above the average, which is shown here by the green line. This is a very similar pace to what we had last year. Now the thing that everybody's been talking about. One of the ideas is that as seasons move along, the coronavirus will die away. This may or may not be the case. However, it indicates how weather can affect these sorts of diseases, particularly things like the flu. At the moment, we have 182,204 confirmed cases. That's an increase over last week of 56%, which is quite stunning. The number of recoveries have been increasing, which is good news. That's 78,340. The number of deaths have increased much faster, though, which is unfortunate, at 7,139. We now have 143 countries that are involved in this, which is 28 increase over last week. And you can see the figures for individual countries marked here on the map. Things are likely to get worse before they get better. So be careful and stay safe. So until next time, goodbye.